This is the Economic Club of Florida, a distinguished platform for discussion of the major national issues of the day. On today's program, Alberto Ibargüen of the Knight Foundation on its $300 million effort to save local journalism.
We look for things that we can accelerate or leverage. We do not pretend we're the mayor. We do not pretend we're responsible for everything. We also don't pretend that it's our programs that matter.
Good afternoon and welcome to the 520th in our series of Distinguished Speaker programs. I am Cindy O'Connell and I have the privilege of serving as your club president. Today we are so privileged to have Alberto Ibargüen with us to learn more about what his important role is as the CEO of the Knight Foundation and what this amazing organization is doing for so many communities in our world. We're so delighted to have you here. What is the Knight Foundation doing primarily to make a difference in the state and in the country?
Well, first of all, it's a great pleasure to be here, to be back in Tallahassee. I always enjoyed coming up here. Knight Foundation was started by Jack and Jim Knight years ago, now 65 or so years ago, and their mission from the beginning was informing community so that citizens would be engaged and we would have a better functioning democracy. They were wonderfully directive but not prescriptive. They said, this is the things we care about. These are the things we care about. Journalism and the communities where we did well, and they did very well. In their day, they had the biggest newspaper company in America when newspapers were at the center of all news. And they left significant fortunes for the benefit of informed and engaged communities. They said they cared about journalism and they cared about the communities. And then they said, we don't have a crystal ball. So the trustees will need to decide 20 years from now, 30 or 40 years from now, what is relevant in terms of informing and engaging communities. And that's what we do.
That's a very important and thoughtful mission, one that takes a lot of care and knowledge to be able to move forward. How have you done that in terms of your program selection and the mission of different things that you've moved forward on?
I'd say two things primarily. First of all, I was lucky enough to have sat in Jack Knight's office for 10 years as publisher of the Miami Herald, so I thought a lot about how he and his brother ran their newspaper company. It was quite different than other newspaper companies. All of the editors reported to Jack, whom I would never call Jack. If he were here, I would call him Mr. Knight. All of the editors reported to Jack, and all of the business managers reported to Jim. Jim ran a fairly similar business company from one town to another. Jack took exactly the opposite approach. Jack wanted the Tallahassee Democrat to be something different than the Miami Herald and something different than the Philadelphia Inquirer, the Detroit Free Press, or the Biloxi Times-Herald, because Biloxi is not San Jose and St. Paul is not Miami. And he wanted newspapers that really reflected the local community. So that's major influence number one in how I think about Knight Foundation and how we work in 26 cities where the brothers had newspapers. We look for things that we can accelerate or leverage. We do not pretend we're the mayor. We do not pretend we're responsible for everything. We also don't pretend that it's our programs that matter. It has to be something that is natural and can be accelerated or leveraged, or otherwise our money is nice. It's always good. If you do charity, it's a wonderful thing. But if you're doing social investing, which is how I think about it, you want a return. I'm an investor. I put money into a project. I want to see the return. I can't take money back, but what I can demand is that school be built, that organization succeed. In the news business, in journalism, we're looking at what makes a sustainable news organization in this digital century that we're living in. It's different. In many ways it's different. In many ways similar to former businesses that that used to deliver news. But what I'm interested in is what will be a sustainable news business that can therefore be independent. It must be independent for it to be really effective. Point 3, I would say, is that we systematically, periodically do scenario planning and SWOT analyses of each of our communities. It's not because we're going to change our programs every other year when we do an updated SWOT analysis of each of our communities, but it's so that we remain aware of what's happening in the community. So, for example, we are not involved in science, but nevertheless, if you live in Miami, Florida, and you're not paying attention to sea level rise, you're missing a big story. If you live in Detroit and you're not paying attention to race issues, then you're not paying attention to the world around you. You have to be able to ground those programs in the reality of that community.
Soon we're going to hear, I know, some wonderful remarks at our Economic Club of Florida meeting about the relevance of local media organizations in today's world. Certainly, everyone has a viewpoint of what they hear from the news relative to its the integrity component or checking facts, etc. What can you share with us about what you're doing with the Knight Foundation with your $300 million initiative for local news access and the formulation of strategies around that?
Well, thank you for that. We've made a pretty significant contribution that I consider to be anti. It's not. This is the beginning of the poker game, and what we're playing for is the survival. I really believe this. I don't think this is hyperbole. It's the survival of a democratic republic. You cannot have a consistently well-functioning democracy like ours if you do not have an informed citizenry that can make decisions that I don't agree with. That isn't the point. The point is that they be informed and that they not be misled, that they not be available for the next charlatan to come along and tell a story and lead astray. This is not about opinion. This is not about political philosophy. It is simply about informing community. So I look at the world. We looked at the world and said, have we anything that we could possibly do at the national level, since so much of what is now called news is cable television shouting matches, which basically boil down to personality, opinion, and more personality. Sometimes there are great programs that actually go into depth, that actually go into great reporting. It's clearly possible to do, but so often it is really just the great shouting match. And we decided that at our size and given our commitment to local community, our commitment should be to local news. I believe that local is where you have the shortest distance between the story and the reader, and the greatest opportunity for the reader to naturally, instinctively be able to verify. You remember Ronald Reagan's trust but verify. It still is a good rule to follow.
That's amazing. I can't wait to hear more about it as we listen to your remarks. Just one last follow-up. You've had a vast career of banking, legal, public service, working in the Peace Corps. Of everything you've done, you've been well-grounded in many different areas. What would you say is the one profession, activity, focus that's led you to be effective where you are today?
Oh, my gosh. I could start with my mother,
of course.
But there really are two moments in my education at Wesleyan that really were intellectually formative. I think it was formative to come to Philadelphia from Puerto Rico, not speaking any English, being old enough to know that I didn't speak the language everybody else in class did, to know what it feels like to be an outsider, to know what it feels like to become an insider, to have that full complement. All of those things matter. But there were two moments. One was at our matriculation. Victor Butterfield was the president, and he said, if you think back on the 4 years at Wesleyan as the best years of your life, then Wesleyan failed. Because the purpose of a great liberal education is to teach you how to always keep on learning. I've taken that to heart for all of my life, and I think about that, I without exaggeration, with great frequency in everything I do. And then about 3 years later, a fellow named John Cage, who was a composer of electronic music, and he offered a concert in the chapel, and it was a New England brownstone Methodist chapel of the very severe variety that you can imagine. And he had arranged on the stage of the chapel in descending order some steel planks, some steel sheets or metal sheets of some sort, put microphones along the side, and he stood in the back and rolled ball bearings down the metal sheets, and they went blink, blank, blink, blank. And I looked at the program, and it said, "This is music." And I thought, my epiphany was, well, if this is music, then there are no rules except for the blinders that we're willing to put on our imagination. And I think that's a really good way to think about philanthropy in the 21st century.
I can say nothing more. That was a beautiful closing. Thank you. And we look so forward to hearing your remarks and learning more about how we can help you articulate your mission in many of our local communities.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
I would say that if you want to go to the website where a lot of these projects are listed, it's kf.org/local news. kf.org/local news.
Thank you, Alberto.
Thank you.
Now here's Alberto Ibargüen speaking before the Economic Club of Florida.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon. It's a great pleasure to be back in Tallahassee, and a tremendous honor, actually, to speak to the Economic Club of Florida. Thanks, Cindy, for your leadership, and thank you, Carol, for a nice, warm introduction. It's always good to be with former publishers. There aren't that many of us still left. And also a former Knight journalism fellow at the ICFJ. When I was publisher of the Miami Herald, I'd come to Tallahassee fairly frequently, and I hosted many South Florida legislative delegation events at the Brokaw-McDougal House, where we had a no speech rule, which was a big draw for legislators who were used to hearing each other speechify, but were really glad for an opportunity to just have a conversation. And we were always lucky, because we had a great relationship with Jeb Bush, to have the governor present, and that was another big draw. So I have great memories of that. And as president of Knight Foundation, I continued my relationship with Tallahassee through my friend Mike Pate, who was the publisher of the Democrat and then later represented Knight Foundation here. Knight Foundation's mission, directly taken from Jack and Jim Knight, who, as I told Cindy earlier today, I would never call Mr. Knight Jack if he were present. I would say Mr. Knight. But Jack Knight and Jim both were directional but not prescriptive. They said they cared about journalism and the communities where they had done very well, and they didn't say, this is what you're supposed to do 30 years from now to stay relevant. They said, you've got to figure it out. And that's what we've been trying to do. We promote informed and engaged communities, focusing on the 26 communities where the Knight brothers own newspapers. The foundation itself has been active here since 1968, as Carol said, about 3 years after the brothers bought the Tallahassee Democrat. And I would correct just one thing that you said, Carol. The foundation has always been primarily privately funded, although the very first grants were from 4 of the newspapers, very, very small number. But the biggest early donor to the foundation was the mother of Jack and Jim Knight, Clara Knight, and she tends to get not enough attention. But she was the one who initially was interested in all of the arts programs that we do, and it's thanks to her estate in the 1950s that the foundation, when it became affiliated, if you will, with Knight Ridder, never took a dime of Knight Ridder money because it was so well funded from the estate of Clara Knight. So I feel she needs to get. We have a big portrait of her in the office, and she needs to get her due. Although she was a very private person, unlike both of her sons. In most of our communities, Knight Foundation is advised by an advisory committee and works through the local community foundation in Tallahassee. Our advisory committee members are Matt Thompson, Matt Tharp, and Megan Doherty. And one of our most fruitful collaborations with a community foundation has been here with the Community Foundation of North Florida, so ably led by Joy Watkins, who over the last 20 years has helped grow its endowment to more than $74 million and its impact in ways you can't even count. Thank you, Joy, for being such a great partner. Knight was actually one of the original donors to the foundation's endowment, so we're doubly proud of that. And congratulations to Joy's successor, Katrina Roll. Katrina, we look forward to working with you. So I'm delighted to be here among friends. I especially appreciate the opportunity to talk in our state's capital about the disappearance of local journalism in America, an essential element of our democratic system. Local journalism in America. Unlike other countries, American news was traditionally local. Historian Joseph Ellis has observed that at the time of the Revolution, there really wasn't a concept of an American. There were Virginians, there were Vermonters, there were even New Englanders, but it wasn't until the Second Continental Congress that you began to have a concept of an American. And also at that time, people scoffed at the idea that a land as vast and expansive as the 13 colonies, with such different and disparate interests and economies, could be held together by some kind of democratic Republican structure. But news media helped form a distinctly American narrative, a narrative about who we wanted to be, that helped us manage pluralism without surrendering democracy. As our nation grew in size and diversity, media remained local and helpful, even in the early decades of radio and television, when the signal some of you may recall, the signal of a local radio station or of a TV station was basically a couple or 3 congressional districts, a mayoral district. It was local. And we didn't even have a national television news program until the 60s. We didn't have a national newspaper until USA Today launched in the 1980s. Instead, what we had was a vast array of local and regional newspapers, radio and television stations that reported an American narrative, a narrative that celebrated American can-do individualism and exceptionalism while promoting local pride, strength, and values. It was a narrative that touched the heart and the mind, which helped us to feel our communities and understand them. Today, that narrative still requires a community informed enough to trust. But trust in nearly every institution in American life, except for maybe the Army and libraries, has collapsed. I attribute much of the slow roll loss of trust to a disastrous lack of knowledge and understanding about things as they are just around the corner, just around your block. You can't easily verify the national shouting matches on cable TV or the intricacies of international affairs, but you can verify stories about people and issues at home, whether about the Board of Education or a pothole or a road that was fixed or not fixed. You know, as a citizen in the town, you know if somebody's writing the truth. You know if one part of town is being conflated with another. You don't need a road map. You simply understand it, and if it is reported accurately, that builds trust. That's something that we want to get back to. Digital media shrank the world and created opportunities to connect, to empathize, to organize, and explore. It is thrilling to live in times of this kind of democratic possibility. But like technology throughout history, it has consequences. One of those consequences is that it facilitated the politics of identity and division. Another is the decimation of the traditional newspaper business and an army of reporters who provided that shared narrative and, frankly, whose skepticism kept the powerful at bay. That level of work is just not being produced enough locally, and that brings me to a third consequence. We have an 18th century structure of government based on a theory of an informed citizenry divided into the specific geographies of cities, towns, and districts. But what we have to inform that citizenry, which is at the core, is a 21st century digital system of informing ourselves that is untethered from that structure. The result is that we're electing people we don't know well to do work we may or may not ever hear about, because the reporting just isn't being done. The local news and information that once provided a sturdy foundation for discussion and debate has left behind contested, shaky ground where everything sounds like opinion. These are dire times for local news organizations, and it doesn't take a former publisher like me to see the consequences reverberating through the society. When a news organization closes its doors, or a local radio station goes off the air, some in the community may be sad, may regret it, others shrug, some may not even notice, but ultimately, the entire community feels the loss. Without tenacious news reporting, incompetence or worse, malfeasance can flourish. And to paraphrase the writer, I don't know if any of you saw that or remember The Wire on HBO. I happened one time to be on a Senate panel, a congressional hearing in the Senate, and he was one of the other people testifying. And at the end, he was asked by one of the senators, well, Mr. Simon, with all of this talk about the loss of local news reporting, what do you see the future? And he said, Senator, I don't have a crystal ball. What I can tell you is without local reporting, this is a really good time to be a crook in local government. That's The Wire talking. But to be clear, I am absolutely not here to argue for a return to print newspapers. I love print newspapers. I subscribe to print newspapers. I read print newspapers. I suspect, looking around the audience, many of you still do as well. But many of us, I think, have known for decades that it's not about the paper, it's about the news. We need to understand how these changes affect our ability to recognize and agree on what goes on in our communities and how we can nourish a neutral ground for baseline facts. So what should we do? How might philanthropy help? And what role can you play in favor of a more effective democracy? At night, we concluded that we should help local news organizations find a path to sustainability, with a heavy focus on leaders and not-for-profit models that put the emphasis on news rather than commerce. They have to be balanced. The organizations have to be sustainable, but it cannot be sustainable at the cost of the mission. We've launched a transformative initiative, a $300 million over 5 years initiative, to support and reimagine local news and information and seeking partners and other investors. We take our cues from the organizations and the communities we support, embracing organic, bottom-up solutions. Our approach really mirrors Supreme Court Justice Brandeis's famous notion of laboratories of democracies, which is what he called the states in the federal system. He labeled the states as the laboratories where they could try novel experiments. He understood that American federalism is premised on the idea that pluralism of approach is the guardian of liberty and the wellspring of innovation. Pluralism of approach is the guardian of liberty and the wellspring of innovation. I'll say that again. It's less about protecting against the failures of endemic central planning and more about the spirit of dynamism and experimentation that comes from decentralizing power. Knight Foundation is trying to create its own laboratories of media and democracy in communities, newsrooms, and universities across the country. I don't mean this in any sense pejoratively about charity, but we are not about charity. We are social investors. We are not about propping up failing organizations. We will systematically support local digital news organizations, including not-for-profits, that we think might forge models for the sustainable delivery of news that communities in a democracy need. We've targeted local reporting and accountability journalism by supporting national organizations working in partnerships with local outlets. The organization receiving our largest grant in this area is called the American Journalism Project, a venture philanthropy initiative that will invest in some 40 local digital news organizations, some of them new, some of them existing. We're also providing significant funding to Report for America, a national service program that trains the next generation of local journalists and places them in newsrooms across the country, from the Sacramento Bee to the Nashville Public Radio. We've invested millions in ProPublica to promote partnership and training of local investigative and database journalists, invested in Frontline PBS to expand its documentary and multimedia-based reporting of local issues, and in Newsmatch to support a national matching gift campaign to amplify the fundraising power of local nonprofit newsrooms. We aim to move beyond temporary solutions and build independent news organizations that are self-sufficient, including making it easier for news organizations to convert from for-profit enterprises to not-for-profit enterprises. If I'd said that to you 10 years ago, you would have laughed. Today, I will tell you that the late Jerry Lenfest, one of the great civic leaders in Philadelphia, bought the Philadelphia Inquirer, one of the biggest, greatest newspapers in the country, put it into a trust, and gave the trust to the Community Foundation. In Salt Lake City, Paul Huntsman is working to turn his family's newspaper into a not-for-profit. He seems to be having some success. The IRS has already approved the trust, and they, I believe, will approve the actual delivery of the newspaper to the trust. What that does is it creates a new revenue stream for the news operation, in that it will provide the opportunity for people to make tax-deductible gifts. And so that is a completely different or a new revenue stream for the news operation. Another part of and we are supporters of both enterprises, and there are a couple of others that are going on that are probably too early to talk about, but there's one in Arizona, one possibly in Georgia, and one possibly in California that all look like maybe this sort of thing. So what does it mean to decide in the IRS code that news is a public good? That's what will be before the IRS and how it treats these organizations. Another part of our $300 million initiative is support for disinterested academic research to help ensure future policy is grounded in data and understanding rather than emotion and hunches. We've turned to some of our nation's most respected academic institutions, investing $50 million of that $300 to support the creation and the expansion of research centers and studies across the country, united by the common goal of understanding how technology is transforming our democracy and how we can intelligently govern the digital public square. Some of the universities where we'll fund research are Carnegie Mellon, George Washington University in DC, NYU, the University of North Carolina, University of Washington State, Stanford, Yale, the usual suspects, Stanford, Yale, Harvard, and the University of Texas. Some of these will be centers of research intended to last indefinitely. Others are shorter-term projects intended to inform current debate with solid data. These are urgent, and these will be from the left and from the right. We are not taking a position. We are simply saying we have got to have solid data and research from all sides in order to be able to figure out how we are going to manage this digital public square. These are urgent and complex issues, and we need to think both fast and slow. A third bucket of projects we're supporting will focus on using the law to preserve and defend the press freedoms and free expression. We funded the creation of the Knight First Amendment Institute at Columbia University, and I will tell you as an aside, this is for me, has been one of the great privileges of being president of Knight Foundation, because there was simply nobody in America who was a greater supporter than Jack Knight of the First Amendment. Whether it was when Lyndon Johnson was calling him up and trying to get him to do stuff, and Jack would write his columns, and for which he won the Pulitzer Prize, or whether it was in supporting his journalists, or in opposing, actually, journalist shield laws. Those of you who know about this know that lots of journalism people want to have state laws that specifically protect journalists and sources, and Jack Knight always rejected that and said there is no better law than the one we started with, which is Congress shall make no law abridging the freedom of speech or of the press. So the First Amendment Institute at Columbia to focus on constitutional issues related to free expression in the digital age. I don't know what they'll do. I don't know what the projects are what the lawsuits are that they'll argue, because this is such a developing field, but they will be there to argue on behalf of free expression. We also endowed at the Reporters Committee for Freedom of the Press a national network of litigators working on behalf of local news organizations. And soon we'll announce support, probably toward the end of this year, support for a growing number of First Amendment clinics that are based in some of our country's great law schools. Education is never far from our thoughts at the foundation, and we'll allocate additional funds for the News Literacy Project, a nonprofit that empowers educators to teach news literacy to middle and high school students. Have to prepare. We'll also train journalists in several ways, including through the Solutions Journalism Network, which fosters civic dialogue and community engagement to produce solutions-oriented journalism. I always reference that anybody can write the gotcha story, but it's a difficult story to say, and here's what people are doing about it. And that's what Solutions Journalism Network does. And finally, a project called Cortico at MIT, which is probably our most technically advanced program. It uses machine learning to help journalists build trust through a deeper understanding of their communities and issues that resonate in their markets. And this is really just the start. I haven't mentioned by any means all of them. It's just the start, and I want to make sure you understand that I'm here because we need friends and we need allies and we need other funders. I'm actually tremendously encouraged by the number of new people, individuals and foundations new to the field who are entering, notably Craig Newmark, who started Craigslist, Democracy Fund, and Piero Midyar, who started eBay. The Rita Allen Foundation, the Koch Network, has been a tremendous funder of free speech and free press in this country. The Emerson Collective. I'm encouraged by the number of Americans who are waking up to the realization that they can't sit idly by while our democracy is challenged. Every one of the investments I've mentioned and more are listed at kf.org/local news. Let me say that again, kf.org/local news. You can click on them and make your contribution. I sound like PBS or NPR. Go there and find the one you want to support, and find what else I haven't even told you about, that we're other ways we're trying to address this problem. I really am thrilled by the increasing drumbeat of recognition of the importance of this mission. Now we need to find the solutions. A few weeks ago, New York Times publisher A.G. Sulzberger wrote about the importance of independent journalism in our democracy. I urge you to read his entire essay, but I want to leave you with one passage in particular. The free press, he wrote, is arguably the most important tool we have as citizens. It empowers the public by providing the information we need to elect leaders and the continuing oversight to keep them honest. It bears witness to our moments of tragedy and triumph, and provides the shared baseline of common facts and information that bind community. It gives voice to the disadvantaged and doggedly pursues the truth to expose wrongdoing and drive change. That's a vision worth sharing, a vision worth promoting and protecting together, a narrative that can bring back the trust that America needs to be great. Thank you, and I look forward to your questions.
Do we have any questions from the group? Yes, please stand, and we'll get a microphone to you.
Well, my voice is loud, I hope. Could you explain your actions of your foundation and the mission with the mission and activities of, say, National Public Radio and Television and Florida Public Radio and Television? Thank you.
I think it would be, I would say the same about any of our support of any news organization, any scholarly research, or any arts organization. We do not and will not tell them what to cover or how to cover. We fund the organization, we fund the program, but we do not ever intervene in the content. If that's your question, I'm not sure if that was the question.
Mission, your activities, what you're doing, because they're doing certain things that have dynamics, you're doing certain things that have dynamics. Our mission, as I said, is in general is to support activities that will inform the citizenry, and I consider NPR to be one of those activities. So our mission to inform community, whether it's through these nonprofits, whether it's through the kind of transition from profit to nonprofit, or through National Public Radio, is, I think, consistent with trying to have an informed citizenry. But I'm not really sure if I understood if I'm answering. It's all right, thank you.
Okay, sorry if I didn't quite get the gist of the question.
Thank you for your presentation.
Thank you, Howard.
Very encouraging direction that the foundation's moving.
My question is, what kind of job do you think we're doing, good or not so good, in terms of teaching our young children in schools how democracy works and the importance of participating and just the basics of understanding the role of the three branches of government?
Well, if you go on a ABC, EF, D, I don't know, I'd say probably a C minus or D plus is how we're doing. Does that, and I guess I'm such a prisoner of hope that I don't accept that as the end of the story. I look at the glass half full, and I look at the organization that I just mentioned, the News Literacy Project, that really tries to engage students in figuring out how to be digitally literate, how to not take anything that you necessarily see on social media as a fact, but how to be a not cynical, but a skeptical reader. You're a skeptical reader of a newspaper. You're a skeptical listener to a radio report. You should be a skeptical user of social media, of digital media. That's really very, very hard. And it's especially difficult because the fact of the matter is that teachers are adults. And adults, until now, grew up reading and then listening and looking at TV that had some video, but it was not quite the same as a diet of all video all the time, or all animation all the time. And if that's the way that you get your information, then we have a responsibility to figure out how to use those new ways of communicating to deliver the message that we need to impart. It is different. It is a different experience to sit and read a book than to watch a movie. It is a different experience to read a newspaper than to look at a YouTube 10-minute video that may be a terrific video about a particular subject, but it's a different experience. The reading is a more internal activity that you do. You don't typically read aloud. You read to yourself. You think about it, and the reaction of people is the function is different than a more shared experience of watching a movie in a theater or watching a video that's viewed by millions of people. I am all for I'll put it this way. Yogi Berra, my favorite philosopher, said one time, if the fans don't want to come to the ballpark, nobody can stop them, okay? So if the fans don't want to come to the newspaper because they're looking at video on YouTube, well, what the heck am I going to do? I'm going to go to YouTube and I'm going to figure out how I can deliver reliable and consistently reliable news and information so they should become informed citizens in the way they want to. Is that how I would have done it? No. Is that how I did it? Absolutely not. My parents didn't teach me. There was no video when I was growing up. So the world has changed and we have to change with it. The important thing, as I said about newspapers, is not the paper, it's the news. We have to get that information to citizens. Yes, sir.
I'm sitting here trying to formulate this question effectively. I'm sort of a voracious reader and listener to the news, and I confess to being constantly or somewhat frustrated by the lack, what I perceive to be a lack of responsibility, a lack of ethics, and even a lack of honesty from those who are purveyors of the news. You're in position to perhaps impact that level of responsibility or lack thereof. My question is, are you doing anything about it? Is it just my sense of paranoia or an old guy being frustrated by not being able to get accurate information?
Well, Well, in the first place, even paranoids have real enemies, right? So we'll start from there. The fact is that we've always had some kind of bias in our news. You go back to the founding fathers, and you read that scurrilous scamp of a Ben Franklin and the stuff that our first great printer, our founding father, whom I adore in so many ways, but man, I would fire that guy for the stuff that he wrote, the cheating, the lying, the dissembling that he did. Skip would never have him on the staff of the Democrat. That's just not that has evolved. But we've always had some form of or measure of our point of view, which is why you have some newspapers that endorse Republicans and some newspapers that endorse Democrats, some newspapers that think education is a beat that you ought to cover, and some that think that transportation is the beat. These are opinions, these are choices, these are. But the thing that I think we've lost in the decimation of the newspapers, in the way the newspapers evolved in the second half of the 20th century, was a profitable business model that was able to sustain an independent news operation that was so graded that it was really, as much as we committed errors virtually every day. When you publish a book every day, the Miami Herald was, sometimes 60 pages. Now take out half for ads, and that's still an awful lot to produce every single day and to be generally accurate and with a commitment to correcting after. How do you do that? You do that by having assignment editors that know. You do that by having reporters that have been well trained. You do that by having copy editors that have been lied to 75 times. And look at it and say, hey, kid, that story doesn't ring right. You do that by having a legal team that looks at these things. You do that by hiring senior editors who have done. So all of these gradations of safety nets, one after another, and that is gone. That is simply not there in virtually every local newspaper that I can think of. I believe they still have that at some of our three great national papers, the Wall Street Journal, the New York Times, and the Washington Post. They have the financial ability to have that kind of a structure. We just don't in the rest of America, by and large. So what do? Well, we've got to start not just looking at what's the new medium, whether it's video or something else, but what is the new way of structuring the business so you can afford to have the structure that corrects for human error, for human foibles, for an editor who may think that blue shirts are better than green blouses, and then there you go. And then somebody comes in and says, "Wait a second, that's an opinion. Who are you? Who said that? Who are you attributing this to?" So that kind of structure is what I think we really have to. That's the challenge, trying to figure out what is the structure. That's what I say when I say the sustainability. That's what I'm looking for. I'm looking for a structure that will support the kind of news reporting that we would all like to be able to rely on. And I admit that every day somebody will make mistakes. Every day somebody will get it wrong. And then every day the editor should be big enough and smart enough and honest enough to say, we made that mistake, and put it in the same place so that everybody knows where you go find the errors, not hide it beneath the agate type where nobody can see it, but make it prominent, make it transparent. That's the age we live in. And I don't know how we do that. I do know that we are going to lose if we don't try.
Yes, sir. I grew up in Miami in the 50s and 60s, so I read the Miami Herald every day.
God bless you.
You gave us a very impressive list of dollars that y'all are spending, spreading around the country to universities and other organizations. in order to help facilitate a rebirth of journalism that would be, I think, what we all grew up to be, which was an independent, unbiased source of information. Yet today, most of the millennials, and you talk so much about digital journalism, today so many of the millennials get their information from Google, from Facebook, from MSNBC, and yet, is there anything that y'all are doing that's going to be tailored to them? Because for many of us, there is a perceived bias there, sometimes unabashed on the parts of the purveyor of the news and those sites. And if we're going to have an impact on the future generation, it seems that we have to focus in on particularly those which have such a significant impact in the thinking of young people.
I think that's a great question, and actually that's my other speech. Where to start? First of all, you're absolutely right. This is if we're talking about the future. Obviously, we're talking about digital. We're talking about social media. We have to ask if Google and Facebook are the two primary sources of information for probably most Americans. I think television is still slightly ahead as the main source of information, but social media is coming right up, and the trend lines are clear. Social media will pass television just like they left newspapers way behind. So what do we do? One of the things that we're doing is the study of media and democracy. That's a grand way of talking about antitrust, a grand way of talking about the impact of Google, Facebook, unchecked information, an impact on elections. Those are all subjects that are being studied in these, in some of the grants that we're talking about. Some of the grants that we're talking about are specifically for the education of journalists in conveying news and information in digital ways that will make it into the computers and the iPhones of young people. Some of them are directly educating young people to be savvier readers. But structurally, we have to look at our laws. We have to look at Section 230 of the Telecommunications Act that specifically exempts internet platforms from liability. One of the, as a lawyer, as a recovering lawyer, you would understand that I had a great appreciation as a publisher for the power of the law, the power of the legal system, both as a sword and as a shield, and I think we used it pretty well back in the day. I pay a lot of attention to what the impact is of these laws, and if I know that if I don't correct a story where we said somebody was this and it turns out that person was something else, I know that if I don't correct that as a newspaper, I am liable in ways that I don't, I have to pay for it. This is in the case of libel. If I produce a product, if I produce a car, if I produce a toy, if I produce a blanket for babies, and it malfunctions in some way, or it burns up, there are theories of product liability in the United States of America, and they do not apply by law under Section 230 to internet platforms. Does it make sense, I ask, that if in an actual case where somebody read on an internet platform that somebody else was running a child pornography ring out of the back room of a pizza parlor in Washington, D.C., and the fellow, so he read it, and the fellow goes to the pizza shop and shoots up the pizza shop. Now, fortunately, nobody got killed. There was some property damage. But had there been, is there liability on the part of the internet platform? The answer is no, because they insist they're only the pipe. we don't control for it. But that's how I got my information. Should there be something, there's an AOL case, and I'm fond of quoting this one because I used to be on the board of AOL. So I used to have a somewhat more tempered view on this thing. But the fact is that it was a good law to begin with to encourage the development of these things back in the 90s, to encourage the development of this new nascent, who in 1992, 3, 4, 5, imagined that we would be where we are today. I sure didn't. And I had some sense of it. I didn't imagine how fast, how vast, how deep, how broad it was going to be. And at the time there was a case, and I don't remember the exact details, but it was a case where something had been published on AOL. This is when AOL owned 85% of internet access, which is a story in itself, because wait another 20 years and we'll be talking about something other than Google or Facebook, probably. And AOL published a libel. And I think it was a TV station repeated it. And the libel lawsuit was brought against AOL and against the TV station. AOL walks away. The TV station had to pay. Why? Because AOL was exempted under Section 230. Should that be? Should the laws of libel, should the laws of product liability apply to the publishers of information online? Should a different inquiry, should they be allowed the kind of monopoly that they have on information? If Google was a car company, it would have been split up so many ways, it's not even funny. If Facebook was an oil company, we would have known what to do. It may be that under current antitrust theory, which is about consumer efficiency, consumer value and efficiency, you conclude that because it's free, after all, it's only the price of my private personal information, which we have not yet learned how to value, and certainly not valued collectively. It may be that is, in fact, the great ultimate reality, that it is so efficient and seemingly free for the consumer that it doesn't matter to you that it happens to control 85% of all the ads between them, 85% of all the ads online. But what if you take a Teddy Roosevelt theory of antitrust and go back to the beginning of antitrust, when remember I told you I'm a recovering lawyer. One of the reasons I'm still in recovery is you never get over it. But one of the reasons I'm not a lawyer is that I now think in a different way. And I think to myself, well, wait a second. Sometimes it's just too darn big for the good of society. It's just not healthy for us to have these entities be so powerful and outside the realm of the public's regulation. I don't know exactly what that means. I don't know whether that's the application of other laws. I don't know whether that's the breakup of the companies. I don't think that it's necessarily regulation, because what regulatory body can possibly keep up with the rate at which technology is changing? So I guess my instinct is we look to the laws of product liability, the laws of libel, the laws that we can in common sense ways apply and do apply to other major companies, that they are free to make a profit as long as they do not harm. And I think that's the great debate for the next 10, maybe 15 years, and very much part of why we funded those centers of research in places like Carnegie. And by the way, one of our principal partners in this is the Koch network, and Omidyar. Omidyar is nobody's going to call him a right-winger, and nobody's going to call Koch a left-winger, and I feel very, very comfortable being right in the middle of that. All of us trying to figure out what the answer is.
Do we have one more question? Glenn, do you have one more question? Want to do real quick?
I was just hoping you could elaborate a little bit more on the trust-funded nonprofit model, business model for local newspapers, Philadelphia or wherever. Has it been established? Is it operational? And is it getting the resources that you indicate obviously are needed?
Yes and no. It is established. Jerry Lenfest did it 3 or 4 years ago. He bought the paper. He created the trust. He had an army of Philadelphia lawyers doing it. And then he gave the trust to the Community Foundation for the one vote on the trust. Now, what is the Philadelphia Inquirer doing with that? That's a question for discussion, and are they making enough use? That's to be continued. That's a story to be continued. In the Salt Lake City case, Huntsman, my understanding is they have created the trust and the IRS has accepted it, and now they are working on delivering the paper to the trust. I don't think they're going to give it to a community foundation. They're going to set it up as a standing trust. In the other 3 cases that I'm aware of, each one has a slightly different legal structure. We're actually putting out a pamphlet on the range of different options. This is one of the things that's really quite exciting about it, and one of the things that makes it, in a way, okay to be able to tell you, I don't know what the answer is going to be, because I actually asked for the publication of this so that we could get in one place a compendium of the 30 or 40 different ways people are trying to skin the cat. We don't know. We're studying this thing. We're spending millions to study it, and we want to invest. We did invest in Texas Tribune, which is probably the most successful of the online local news operations. They had a business model that sounded to me like the way Jack Knight ran his newspapers. They hired the best editor. They hired a businessman, not the religion editor who would occasionally sell ads on Friday after typing up the story. And then they hired Gyro Gearloose, the guy who was all about media, didn't really care about the news, didn't really care about the business, just cared about the technology. That is exactly how night newspapers were run, because you had the best editor you could get, you had the business guy, and you had the production guy, and the delivery people, and that's common sense. And there's a story there that I know we're running out, but my favorite Texas Tribune story is that there was a woman named, I think her name was Wendy Davis. She later ran for governor of Texas. Didn't win, but she was a state legislator, and she was doing a filibuster in the well of the House in Texas. And the issue was they were defunding Planned Parenthood. She was in favor, so they're sitting around in the newsroom, the editors and tech guy and so forth, and the editors are talking about, what are the issues? We're going to cover what her position is, who's opposed, what's the background of the people opposed, what's she really looking for, what are the chances, who's going to vote. They're doing all the usual newsroom stories. And the tech guy says, this is 10 or 11 years ago. The tech guy says, wait a minute, why don't we just put her filibuster on our website? They looked at him and said, what are you talking about? And he said, the Texas legislature has a live feed, and I can just snag it and put it up. She can do her filibuster on our website. They said, what is that? And he said, watch. And he goes, click, click, click. And all of a sudden, there's Wendy Davis doing her filibuster on the website of the Texas Tribune, whose only mission is politics in Texas. If an atom bomb drops on Tallahassee, the only coverage in the Texas Tribune is what is the Texas political consequence of the atom bomb in Tallahassee. And there's his politics, and they all sort of look at him, and all of a sudden, the Texas Tribune website absolutely blows up. What's the lesson? You've got to have that diversity of viewpoints around the table. We are stronger in our diversity when we work it together, and you have to be able to think about the new technology, allowing you to tell the news, to tell that story in different ways that is relevant for this new audience. Evan Smith is the editor of the Texas Tribune, and he's just one of the very best editors, I think, working in America today, period. Not digital, not print, just of all editors. This guy is amazing. He's absolutely terrific. He didn't think about it. Why? Because he wasn't a tech guy. The other guy could care less about the editorial. He was thinking about tech. You marry those and you have a winner. Thank you.
You've been listening to Alberto Ibargüen, CEO of the John S. and James L. Knight Foundation, speaking before the Economic Club of Florida on October 8, 2019 in Tallahassee, Florida. For more information on the Knight Foundation, visit kf.org/local news. The Economic Club of Florida promotes interest and enlightenment on important economic, political, and social issues of the day. To learn more, including how to become a member, visit our website at economic-club.com. This program was recorded at the Florida State University Alumni Center in Tallahassee, Florida.